Okay, I think we should be live in a second. Just give us a second.
Okay.
I think it's loading now. Come on. Because this is the whole point. Like, it's all right us chatting between the five of us. Okay, we're live on YouTube now. Okay, sending you a link. We should be live in a second. Just give us a second. Okay. I think it's loading now.
I can hear bleed back, so I think it will just automatically load, even with that link. Maybe not.
Let me know. I've posted it. The links in the Facebook in the BLM podcast group.
But I haven't got that on. Can you put it in the chat in here?
Yes, I can. 1 second.
Sorry, I've got the phone and separate to the PC.
Okay. Sorry, guys, who are live with us. We're just getting set up now.
Boy, looks like she's going to sleep.
We'll wait for a few people to join us.
Oh yeah, I can see us, literally. That's really wild. All right.
Sorry, guys.
All good.
I pinched someone else's name for this Zoom account as well, so that's confusing.
Samuel.
Yeah. Everyone got the link and stuff, yeah?
Yeah. I'm just going to re-put it on my wall.
I need to repost it on the...
Nightmare.
To repost the new link on my Instagram. Yeah, sorry guys, I did test it and it did work, but hey, this is what it is.
It is what it is?
It is what it is.
Okay.
It is what it is.
Do you have a starting point for us, Mark?
Yes, I do.
You're just saving it for a bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just wanted some time to prepare and Google some answers. That was all.
Yeah. Well, I want to carry on a little bit from the first podcast that we did. It was me, Khareem, and Sam, the real Sam Curtin, not the person whose account I've stolen for this evening. In just discussing what had happened so far and what had led to this point, why George Floyd was such a significant event and how we have reached this point. I guess the kind of title and where we're looking at going now is okay, we've started to establish that Black Lives finally matter. What's next? Where do we want this to go? What are we looking for? We know there's no perfect world. We know that we're not perfect humans. We're not naive to the fact that we're never going to live in a perfect world. But what would be some good steps to have? What kind of things do we want to see? What social reforms do we want to see? What reforms in education do we want to see? Are these things feasible? How can we start to shift power to be distributed amongst people so that people can start to self-govern, so that we can, is that even a good thing? How do we move to a society that is, it's probably going to be capitalist, let's face it, but is there a good form of capitalism that we can employ that actually through taxation, it's like what was it after World War What? Well, after World War II, people were getting taxed like 80%, like top earners. But most people didn't really grumble about it because they were actually rebuilding the economy. Companies would look at actually having some responsibility to provide vocational training for their staff, to provide a sense of well-being for their staff. So it's not just profit first, it's how do we build companies and businesses that contribute both through taxation to their economy, because I believe they've got a big role to play, but actually contribute to people's mental well-being through employment rather than just a profit first venture, which I believe drives a lot of problems. It's from sweatshops to money laundering to underreporting of taxation, to just general feelings of people wanting to escape the 9 to 5. So that's kind of, I don't know if that counts as a starting point, but that's where I'd love to go. We've got 4 people watching. I think everybody's okay. Perfect. Everybody who's watching now on the live, just give us a shout if you can hear us. Give us a shout if you can see us. Hopefully you can all join in. And again, please post comments down the side. Let us know some things that we can talk about. If you've got points that you want to share, please put them in there as well, and we'll try and discuss them as we go along. Sorry, we've been a bit late getting onto this. Hopefully we'll be smooth sailing from here on in. Okay, cool. We'll just wait for Zipporah to join us. Fantastic. Let's have a little introduction for everybody who's watching. Joe, why don't you go first? Just tell us who you are and what your interest in all of this is.
Hello, I'm Joe. I'm based in London. I'm a musician, and my family background, I'm half Palestinian. So it's unfortunately something I've been aware of for most of my life. So yeah, that's me.
Great. Khareem, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Khareem. I'm a historian, playwright, musician, but obviously history's my passion, always been for the last 34 years. I've been studying and teaching and writing plays as well to teach as well. So yeah, that's what I'm all
about. Zipporah, how about you?
I'm Zipporah, and obviously I'm Black, but I'm also Kenyan. And yeah, I think I'm just in the middle of an awakening of taking the action that's needed to make sure that we establish equality for people who look like me, also for people who don't look like me. I'm just currently, I'm glad to be in the midst of such knowledgeable people, especially the historian, because I'm still in the process of educating myself about what's really going on in the world, but that's me.
Great. And Stefano, what's your kind of interest in this? How have you?
Yeah, well, I'm Steph, a musician. I currently live in Italy, but I'm from London. I'd say, you know, I'm very into politics, always been into politics. And yeah, I like what's kind of happening at the moment when you're seeing, because I see it as a much bigger thing. Obviously, it's really important what's happening right now, but I see it as a shift in consciousness across the planet. I mean, you're seeing it in China, you're seeing it with the Extinction Rebellion, you're seeing it with all these different factions. France with the yellow vests. I think that the old days where people used to say, oh, nothing will ever change, there's nothing you can do, where they've been programmed to just switch off, is changing, you know, because when things start to change, it's not one thing that happens, lots of things happen, because people start to realize that they can change things. And they go, well, hold on a minute, you know, we protested for this and we got change. What should we do next? You know, so I think the whole global picture is something I've been hoping for a long time, really. You know, this kind of change that people stand up, and because there's so many wrongs in the world, you know. So yeah.
So let's maybe start from that point then. So obviously there's a bit of, I guess, a lot of controversy. I guess everybody in this chat will have seen, particularly online, conversations centering around something that goes along the lines of, I understand that people want to protest, but I don't agree with the violence. I don't agree with the rioting. And then perhaps another faction that say, I also don't necessarily condone violence, but let's be honest, it gets stuff done, right? And then we can go into all sorts of threads from that. You can compare World War II to any number of crusades to what's happening at the moment. You know, where do people kind of stand on that personally, in terms of, you know, whilst, you know, yeah, just throwing the question out there. How do we think things have panned out? Do we think the media is reporting things in a fair way? Do we think they're focusing on certain things rather than others that they shouldn't? I mean, we know the media is not perfect, but let's have a little bit of commentary around on the protests recently in general.
I think the one thing that Akala pointed out in some of his earlier videos that I used to watch when I was younger, it was the dehumanization of Black people. You know, instead of addressing us as people, we are addressed as hooligans, we are rioters, we are looters, and I think it's very interesting to see that even in the middle of a racial uproar, upheaval, and what I'm looking at as a revolution, or I'm hoping will be a revolution, Black people are still being villainized. So for example, in Hull yesterday there was a Black Lives Matter protest, and the one thing we constantly had to keep saying is, we know that there's an anti-Black Lives Matter protest on the other side of the city. Avoid it, because if any conflict is sparked and you're on the end of it, when the story is told, you will be demonized.
Right.
The story that will be told won't be our side of the story, and that is one of the fundamental structures of the oppression of Black people. It's devaluing and degrading the voice that we have. Our truth, is it really truth? So like one of the biggest things that has been heartbreaking for me has been looking at the discrepancy between the COVID reports. So we see black protesters on the portrayed by the BBC being used as the reason for the COVID spread, subtly being used for we're already the scapegoat. We already know we're going to be the scapegoat for the second peak of COVID. Not the government's lack of leadership in this, not Boris not really knowing whether we should stay in or go out, or go out and stay in. But Black people protesting are going to be the root of this. Why haven't you used lots of white families on Brighton Beach, thousands of photographs of people not socially distancing for just while enjoying privilege? The privilege to go out, to have ice cream, to have a walk on the beach. But the people fighting for their lives, risking COVID, are the ones that are being demonized. And I think that's something that I think social media is changing that, because now we can see objective reporting. Camera phones are becoming the new media. We are becoming individual journalists, because we can't trust. What was the media there for? Initially, it was there for propaganda.
And but is it becoming just more and more of a confusing place, though? Sorry, Joe, I know you want to make a point. Because again, you mentioned we've got millions of individual journalists, right? But again, are we just entering an era where people just record the stuff they want to see, right? They just record the stuff that shocks them the most. And again, everybody's a reporter. Everybody knows something about something. Yeah. And again, the thing, how do people seek out information anymore? Because if you've got to go to one little video that someone shared in the back corner of the internet to find the truth, how do people find that stuff?
Well, can I say something very quickly? Sorry, I didn't want to butt in. So firstly, arguably this whole movement this time around started because somebody was filming a situation that absolutely needed to be seen. And then secondly, I'd say from Zippy's point is that you're getting a cumulative account of things. You're not getting one single narrative or even four. You're getting thousands, maybe millions. And while that might seem overwhelming, if millions of stories are very similar, then we can aggregate from that's what's actually happening, or that's closer to the truth than what we're being told, or what the one broadcasting legion is showing us.
Yeah, and I think like what you're saying, Joe, is really important, because now we're moving from a place where the news that we receive, or the information we receive, is not being filtered through the minority. So when you're having the opportunity to judge the information that you're receiving, you've got a vast amount from the extreme of this is our side of the story, the extreme of somewhere in the middle is the truth. And the one thing that we can certainly, say is, we know that Black people are constantly villainized by the media. Trump said that the protesters who wanted to go out to get their hair cut, get coffee with guns to the faces of policemen were good folk, good people.
And we're allowed to protest and it not be made into a thing.
Yeah, they can, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts when it's Black people. And the worst thing is the fact that the majority are willing to look at it and be like, yes, these violent protesters, a lot of our protests haven't actually been violent. The violence hasn't been sparked by the Black peaceful protesters, because what they're protesting against is violence.
Of course, and why would Black people want to start problems with American cops? It just doesn't make any logical sense.
Why would I go and stand in the face of somebody coughing when they've got COVID?
Right.
They've got a big sign that says, I will kill you as a result of the action that you're going to take. Why
Exactly.
would he?
It's very strange. And also, the thing I'm just showing up, it's reverse image searches of the footage from the violent footage from the protests in London were actually all taken from an EDL march and like a white power demonstration, and they were put as if they were this march.
Yeah.
They were put up on Facebook and shared and liked and pushed out, and people have reverse searched them and said that. But obviously, so-and-so who's 50 years old isn't going to have done that, and they're going to take it at face value. It's going to justify their internal bias.
Exactly. But I think that's the most important thing is the fact that it's not a bad thing, because it's not being, information is not going through the funnel anymore. Your beliefs, that's why ignorance is becoming eradicated. The percentage of ignorant people is going to continue to lessen because the evidence is there, the information is there. So your ignorance becomes a choice, and not a I just didn't know.
Yeah.
You know.
And
I
people
think
really buy into things based on statistics and information, or do they buy into things based more on emotion? This is the thing.
that's emotion.
Emotion. Yeah.
I mean, if somebody's telling me, please buy this pair of Nike trainers because they're 50% more, I'm like, no, the advert for that made me feel good. That's why sex sells.
Yeah.
We go more by what we feel than what we know. And I think that, yeah, and it goes back to the whole classist thing, that the fact that people are ignoring that President Trump and the EDL and the Yellow Vest and everybody else who's crawling out of the woodwork to protest against Black Lives Matter are protecting things from being vandalized, but are not willing to fight and protect lives that are being lost. But we're willing to overlook that because of how it's being reported, how it's being shared. So that does show that actually it's a great thing to have the mask. If we didn't see that Black man with the knee to the neck, I don't think we'd be where we are today. And multiple surveillances showed George Floyd wasn't resisting arrest, but on the radio, it was his resisting arrest. More video surfaced. Yeah. He was actually being assaulted in the police vehicle before they dragged him out.
Right.
And knelt on his neck. So it wasn't a 9-minute thing, but the narrative we got was 9 minutes, and 9 minutes was enough to shock us. So I think it's important that take your phone out, film it, because you can't argue with video.
Yet. Deepfakes.
Yet.
Well, this is maybe not so much a bit of a tenuous link, but I wanted to move on to something that I saw the other day around something I saw Morgan Freeman post. And actually, I think, Steph, you posted this, didn't you, on a Facebook conversation?
Yeah.
We were talking about. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Okay, so well, I think if I'm going to talk about that, then I need
we'll talk around the conversation. Yeah, that we were. That
yeah, I have to start at the root of it, I guess. So, because obviously, you know, I'm in support of Black Lives Matter. I'm in support pretty much anything that is anti-establishment, if I'm honest with you, because you know, I don't think that the system, the way, I think we're all being held back, if I'm honest with you. I think that we should be 20, 30 years ahead of where we are. We're kind of being kept back with the education system, with, you know, a lot of different things. But one thing that worries me, okay, is that basically you see it with every single organization, okay, for going back, you know, to the IRA or to any organization, okay, they will always present their story in the way that will get them the most exposure, that because these are organizations that they want to pursue, you know, their ideology at the end of the day to as many people as they can, to have the biggest impact. It's a natural thing for any company, for any person, for any musician, to basically try and maximize their exposure. Okay, so throughout politics, you know, through anybody, they will always present it in a way, you know, that it best presents the cause to give it the most credence. Okay, so one thing that worries me is that basically, I think that no one will argue that there is definitely like a socio-economic side to a lot of this stuff. Now, for me, okay, this is my opinion, that maybe, you know, some people don't agree with, some people do, but I think that we have a problem in the West, okay, where we have different types of oppression, different types of discrimination, okay? But in the West, for some reason, we put them on a hierarchy. We don't see, for instance, for me, social for sort of you know, like financial, religious, race, gender, you know, for me, they are all different types of discrimination, and they are discrimination at the end of the day. But in the West, okay, we will say, well, you know, if a CEO of a company, right, he posts something homophobic, okay, everybody will go crazy. You know, they'll be tearing things up. They'll be ordering him to resign, okay? But then they will go to an iPhone shop the next day. They will buy an iPhone and they will think nothing of the child slaves that had to dig all the minerals up in Africa to make that phone. Because in the West, we think, well, that's economic discrimination. There's nothing to do with us, you know, but discrimination is discrimination, okay? So going from that point, okay, basically, for me, there is racism everywhere. We all know that. I mean, I'm not white myself. Yeah, I'm kind of like a Arabic Italian. I class Italy as a northern territory of Africa, if I'm honest with you. You know, so you know, I obviously had some abuse when I was younger. It's not like you know, I've got quite thick skin, if I'm honest with you. You know, when I was younger, I didn't take any shit from anybody, and most people left me alone. So, but you know, the way that I look at this, and this is what has me worried. Okay, is that for me, any cause, if you really want to pursue any cause, the worst thing that we're seeing in modern, this is where I think that we might differ. I hope we don't, but where we might differ from the past, is that what we're seeing is a pattern of division. Okay, we're seeing it in Brexit. We're seeing it in the left and right politics. We're seeing it in race, in every single issue that we have in the world.
Those are all the same thing. You realise that?
What's that?
Left and right, racism, Brexit. Those are all the same thing.
Well, in a
different divisions.
Yeah, to a certain, but let me get to the point anyway, because that's not the point. Okay, but we're also with men and women. You know, okay, for instance, you know, I've got a lot of problems with the legal system of what happens to a lot of men being oppressed. You know, I've got a good friend of mine, and he's the most loveliest man ever. You know, and his wife went to a solicitor. And the solicitor just turned around to him and said, well, if you file an abuse claim against him, he'll be stopped from seeing his kids, and that'd be the end of it. And so she did that. And in England, if a male is accused of any crime without being proved at all, they will be stopped from seeing their kids. And they reckon that this is one of the highest causes of suicide in the UK.
It's a big problem. Who wrote those laws?
Yeah, no, but I'm not getting. I don't want to get into a debate about this.
The role of primary carer.
Yeah, no, I agree that
they should be feminists then.
What's that?
So they should be feminists then, and campaign the men who've been abused. They should deconstruct the patriarchy and have equal rights over their children in the legal system.
I think that it should be innocent until proven guilty, like it always was. You know,
it change the law that happens at the end of it.
it's a massive topic, and it's not just something that you can just, you know, like just
straightforward.
There's lots of sides to it. There's women that do get abused. There's children that are at risk. There's, you know, there definitely is feminist issues. I mean, my nan, she was a suffragette. You know, I'm not saying that there's no issues for women across the planet. Of course there is. But what I'm saying is that there's lots of division, okay, between on this topic, between men and women, and they get played against each other. It's instead of having bringing people together to sort out differences, they're being played against each other as if they're on one side. And what happens? So,
Steph, sorry, just to button briefly. So just to kind of condense your point a little bit, because, and again, getting back to that video that you posted after that discussion we had on Facebook, right? Because one of the things that Morgan Freeman said was, some of his newer posts are sort of kind of contradicting this a little bit, but one of the things that Morgan Freeman said was one of the ways we can combat racism is just stop talking about race. I'll stop calling you a white man, you stop calling me a black man, and perhaps that's a massive oversimplification of the issue.
Okay.
But do you feel like that's one of the things that we're facing, is that we're saying, okay, you're a black man, and these are your I'm going to put you I'm going to call you your culture, and these are the things that black men and women like. They like this, they like this, they like this, and this is what black people do. And these are the things that white people like. They're like this, they like this, they like this. And in a way to clench onto part of your point, we cause division by saying these people like this thing and these people like this thing.
Yeah. Let me get directly on support, because I sort of drifted off, didn't I? So if I try and concentrate, because it's quite a big topic, so to condense it down to get it. But basically, what the point is, that what I'm saying is that hate as an emotion is much stronger than love. Okay, so what they've worked out, and we've seen this through advertising on the internet, they target people with hate. Okay, because it's a quicker way to make someone join your cause. Okay, I'm not talking about anything in particular. I'm talking about everything is now marketed to us like that, from adverts to you know, everything. Okay, so love is something that takes a long time to make someone fall in love with you. You can make someone hate you in an instant. That's the point of it, right? So they use hate, but what happens is people end up being divided. Okay, so when you want to come together and you want to solve an issue, you need to have a middle ground. Not that you need to concede, okay? But the point is that what's happening is we're being polarized. So you're ending up with people on one side saying, no, anybody who even says anything that I don't agree with is this, you know, and then you've got people on the other side saying, well, hold on a minute, you know, you are like that because you've got this. And if I give you an example, okay? I'll give you an example. Let's say Brexit, okay? There was a lot of people, okay, who were basically, they voted. I didn't vote, to be honest. I thought the whole thing was crazy, you know, it blew my mind. I had to turn the internet off. But you had people who were saying, you know, for instance, that if I lost my job, my dad lost his job because there's people coming and they're stealing our industry, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to vote to give English people jobs, right? So a lot of people say, well, that's a racist attitude to have, okay? Now, what I come back to is that if we're completely polarized, now we say anybody who has any racist views whatsoever is evil, okay? Now, is that...
Everybody says that.
No, is that the case though? Because when we look at where racism stems from, okay, it comes from places that have low education. And if we look at the root cause of why people become racist, the reason that people become racist is it goes back to a almost tribalistic instinct. And the tribalistic instinct is that if someone came to your area and you didn't know who they were, you would fear them, right? And it's primitive. It's from ignorance, complete ignorance, a lack of education, that they fear these people coming over and stealing my job, they're stealing my life, they're blah, blah, you know. But in a way, it's not because they're evil, it's because they've had no education. So for me, what I find is that when you don't have a middle ground, when you're not looking at these people and saying, well, what's the actual issue here? What's the problem? What can we change to change? just shouting at people, you need to stop being racist, is not going to make people stop being racist, because there's root causes why these people are ending up becoming like that we need to address.
I don't want to cut you off, Steph, but I think that I'd like to explore with some others. Khareem, what would you say to that?
To what? So much.
But even just on that last point around the fact that are we making an error perhaps in villainizing people rather than encouraging people to?
No. I wouldn't say villainize. What the point I'm trying to make, okay, from the
sum it up in one sentence for us, Steph.
Yeah, from what Morgan Freeman was saying, basically, and that video is that what we've done is we've shut off all debate around the issue. Okay, we're saying that there's a race problem throughout the community that's infiltrated the police. Okay, and that's the cause of all the problems. But honestly, yes, there is racism. There's racism everywhere in the world. I've seen it myself. I grew up in quite a place with a lot of tension. Hayes, right next to Southall. There's lots of Indian people in Southall. There was lots of tension in my area between different groups of different races. So I grew up around racist,
Sure.
racist people.
What are you trying to make, Steph?
So basically, what happens is that we put this all onto a race issue. Everything is just solely race, but there is other aspects to this. There's a social economic. I think it's maybe even more economic discrimination, which to me is just as bad, okay, as it is a racist problem, because they say that, okay, for instance, a white man is 1.5 times less likely to be killed if he's unarmed as a black man. Okay. Now, let's just explore what you said so far, Steph, and Khareem. I'd love to hear what you think about some of that. I mean, are we looking at race as a social construct? Is it political? Is it biological? Is it a subset of something else? What are we looking at here? What does history tell us about this? You still with us? Oh, we lost you there, Khareem.
Well, one of the things is ignorance. And ignorance isn't just... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you now.
Just can't see you.
Can you hear me now?
Frozen.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
We can't see you.
Ignorance isn't ignorance isn't just about not having education. It's also about being taught the wrong thing. Yeah, because even if you didn't have education, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have certain views about race, because race is taught in schools, part of education, isn't it? When we go, we learn about Negroid, Caucasoid, Mongoloid, classifications given to us by Johannes Blumenthal in the 18th century, which never existed before. So if you read Pliny, if you read Plato, if you read the father of European history, Herodotus, you don't hear any mention of race as such. People weren't denied opportunity because they were black or they're white. Even if I captured you, Joe and Steph, as a consequence of war and made you my captives, consequently slaves, doesn't mean that you couldn't aspire or rise up in my system to be something other than what you started out. So it doesn't, but only in this chattel slavery we see with the African slave trade, was it meant to be in perpetuity. So this thing about ignorance and race and all kind of things, these things are taught. They're not absorbed organically and become a race.
Can I just answer that? Just sorry, but that is actually, they've done statistics around the world where they've compared the amount of racist attacks in areas and the education level of the children, their scores in their tests. And they found a direct correlation that the lower the education level of the area, the higher the amount of racist attacks. So they think that and I do understand that, yeah, it's taught. If you have a ignorant parent who was uneducated and they had these views, they could try and put them onto you. But one thing that I've really noticed, okay, because like I said, I grew up in an area where there was a lot of racial tension. So I had a lot of Pakistani friends, I had a lot of English friends, and some of the people who had parents, and I'm talking about on both sides, because I knew some people who, you know, anyway, they had racist parents. What I noticed, this is just my experience, but I've seen it many, many times, and that's that the kids that went to university, okay, they didn't end up like their parents. In fact, they hated them for their views. So from being more educated and being more worldly, they then completely broke the loop, you know, because they basically realized that their views were wrong. You know, so not always, it's not always going to work like that. It's not, you're never going to address every problem, but it's definitely got it might not be all of the problem, but
I just want to chime in on what you've just said. You know, a lot of what you're speaking about is based on your exposure, and the most dangerous kind of racism isn't actually it's not the racism that you read about in the statistics. It's the racism that comes from the people who produce the statistics, and they're the most educated people in the world.
Thank you.
So it's racism. You can't even really, because you have to realize, and it goes back to what we were kind of trying to talk about at the beginning of this conversation, is the fact that class, which is a whole, you know, economical thing, class and racism were born of the same of the same blood, right?
You know, I agree with that.
So we can't then blame those who have been miseducated about race by the same culprit that has created racism. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is that coloration, what I'll tell you about statistics is, and I guess this is the great thing about the way that the world is changing because of technology, is there is a lot of misreporting when it comes to statistics. There is because it's the same police that produce statistics on crime are the same police brutalizing Black men. So how are you going to trust those statistics?
The same in charge of the hen house.
You know,
from that side,
it's solely based on your exposure of a community that you lived in when you were growing up, but based on historical, you know, and the historian here can, and I think we should let him educate us on that, because it's not based on just the exposure of what he knows growing up. This is the report, consistent report.
No, I don't. I mean, honestly, I don't base everything from when I was growing up. I mean, from what you're saying there, I agree 100%. I mean, the way that they present the Muslim community, you know, or they won't call a white person a terrorist, and the way that they promote this agenda that everybody has to be put inside of their boxes, and that's the way that they should be regarded. Yes, there is an institutional problem that goes all the way back to the days of the elite. Well, they've never gone, you know. So yeah, on that side of it, I agree 100%. Yeah, I'm not disputing that in any way. That's not.
So coming back to what you were talking about, the areas that you've witnessed where it's the poorest. So I can tell you there's an area called, well, I'm not going to name it, but near where I live, and I live near a lower economic area compared to the area that my brother lives in, filled with educated people. Economically, even the kind of shops are present, you can tell in two different worlds. But we're not getting our tires slashed. They are getting their tires slashed by the educated. They're getting the racist attacks. But the only issue is when they call and they report it to the police, it's their neighbors that they're speaking to. So we can't separate race and class. You know, I think the working class, you can't excuse racism on any level, but misinformed or miseducated people who are racist are less dangerous than, because you can correct that, than educated people who make conscious decisions to continue to perpetuate hate and division. Sorry, I'm going to hand over back to you, Khareem. I just wanted to...
Yes, please. Yes, I'd love to hear what you think.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Zebora makes some good points there. And I think the system is set up by educated people. So, you know, education doesn't teach us how to critically think. It teaches us what to think. So when you go to school, they give you a certain amount of concepts, and these are things that you must believe in. This is truth. But one of the biggest victims in all of this is truth, and I think, if people could really hear truth, it'd be so liberating. I mean, and it would certainly, from my exposure to history, I read everything, and it would kind of revolutionize, and walking around what's in my head and then hearing what people say, it kind of makes me think, if they were to see inside of my brain, or not just mine, but anybody who has that sort of exposure, it would kind of revolutionize everything about what they believe, simply because most of what we believe is a load of nonsense, but we're educated, we're taught what to think, and we're never given that, the idea that we should be critical, think, challenge. Where's the spirit of inquiry, which starts when we're a child, when we say why and how, and then that's sort of drummed out of us. If you ask a teacher, well, if you have an idea in yourself that what she's saying or he's saying doesn't sound right, your spirit of inquiry, where you question, and all teachers should be welcoming questions. They shouldn't cut people off who ask questions and say you're disturbing. That's what happens to a lot of black kids in school. They ask questions, they challenge things, and they said, "Oh, you're a disturbing influence. Go outside the room, stand in the corner. You're destructive." This is nonsense. Teachers, all teaching should welcome questions, because then you'll be able to explain yourself. You see, and then you can hear critical arguments, and then you can have, but debating. Who learns to debate in school? It depends where you are. Socioeconomic. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
That's it. They literally do it.
Future governments, right?
Then they go out to Commons and pretend to be on different sides.
Football clubs and sports for certain areas are what are amplified. But when you go to a private grammar school, there's debate, there's politics, there's
politics,
all kinds of stuff. And I think,
taught to lead.
Yeah. And the rest of us are taught to follow. So right. I think one of the biggest things what we need to really look at is educational reform. We need to talk about Black history before slavery.
Yeah.
So then you can understand the ramification. You can understand the magnitude of damage and the extent of brutalization. I keep thinking of this as the British Holocaust, and the British don't know their history. So it's easy to sit there and cross your arms and say it's uneducated people, or it's these Black people. If they made better choices, they wouldn't be where they are. But I think about history and what I learned in history lessons. I learned about Hitler, but nobody told me that the British government was still using concentration camps in Kenya up until 70 years ago. My grandparents were freedom fighters. And through finding out who my family are and the roots, I'm finding out so many damaging things about the British government. And it goes back to the misrepresentation of people. The foreigners are always the rapists. The Black ones they're the rapists, they're the killers, they're the thugs, they're the looters. But actually, everything that British society is built on the bedrock of them doing those things. To Black people.
It's a projection.
And the way that we've represented Black people throughout history, if we've even mentioned them at all, has always been in the context of either slavery or racism. And again, to come back to what Akala was talking about last night, you've got a whole continent of people who, as far as history concerned, was just waiting around for white people to come and save them. Until slavery happened, and this is not the story.
And we look at things like what happened in Cambodia. When you commit a mass genocide, you erase the education identity. It's easy to brainwash anybody into thinking what you want for them to think about that race and that people, because they themselves are stripped of that education. They themselves are stripped of their identity. You have to consider the fact that up until a few years ago, it was illegal for Black people to read and write. That could cost you your life if you could, because then you would be able to educate your people and liberate yourselves from the constructs that have held you. You have to consider the fact that 63 years ago, there was a man who was admitted to a mental asylum for applying to go to university. A Black man. And these are the lessons that we do not learn in schools. These are the things that we are not taught. And I think the bringing down of statues and so forth, it's great. But while all of this stuff is happening, if we do not have educational reform, and I think it's something that should be made mandatory in schools, in places of work, in places of worship, it should be the curriculum everywhere. Free community centers to learn of the history, because at the end of the day, the history is written by those who won. The narrative is written by those who rule. Again, we're talking about the funnel of information. So the moment that we break that funnel, then we start to break this. And what you said earlier as well, and I'm so sorry, I'm taking up time, but it's we're talking about the things that we want to see change, and how we want for things to change economically. We need to know the background, the history. For things to change, everything, the bedrock of that is education. Without that, nothing can happen. You know, and I think what you'll find is the moment we get rid of the miseducation of history, the bigotry will really show itself. It is where the ruling class is. We will then realize that the racists are not the uneducated. Those are just the uneducated. The racists are the educated. They're the ones in power making decisions.
Yeah.
I think we do well to remember as well that, you know, for those who, I'm losing my train of thought. Sorry, someone else carry on. I had a point, but I've forgotten it. It'll come back to me.
Can I just say something quickly into that thing about because I think you were directing that at me a little bit, the education thing. I've been attacked from all sides here now, Jake.
No, it's a good point.
No attack.
No, just a quick thing is that for me, this is my own personal opinion, but for instance, I hate American foreign policy. I hate it. I hate British foreign policy. I hate a lot of foreign policies. You know, I think it's disgusting what the people at the top do, you know, and they have done ever since Rockefeller, going back to the war, ruining education, so that, like what you were talking about earlier, Khareem. But I don't hold it against the people, because these evil people at the top, they don't only abuse other countries and other peoples, they abuse their own people. We're seeing it now. We're seeing people being starved to death in their houses, you know. We're seeing people who, you know, it's terrible what's happening, you know. And I think that we need to separate our feelings of hate from projecting it onto, you know, everybody. And we need to concentrate it on the places where it's justified, you know, because at the end of the day, we're never going to accomplish anything if we don't come together. And it's like, for instance, I had a talk with someone yesterday, and I said to them, they were saying, oh, these statues, they need to come down, and this and that. They're really angry, you know, oh, blah, 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 this and that. And I turned around to them, I said, yeah, I said, that statue, it sounds disgusting what it did. You know, it really does. But why are we not talking about putting statues up of the people who brought us together? You know, why are we not talking about the people who changed everything? The people who maybe, you know, they lived in a time of slaves, and they rescued some slaves. They kept them in their home as a family, and then they fought for their rights to make them free, because they knew in their heart that they were a person just like them.
Who would you suggest?
Yeah, because we had people like that as well. Why are we not cherishing the good things that have brought us together, instead of always focusing on the negative and the hate? This is one thing
I don't necessarily agree with that, especially if we're just talking about you know, the people that helped, you know, all of that stuff, because that's kind of like thanking a fish for swimming in water. You know,
I mean there was people who were completely opposed to slavery.
No, they were, but again, but what I'm saying by thanking a fish for swimming in water is Black people didn't enslave themselves. It was white people. So correcting something that you may not directly, I don't know whether that makes sense, because then we go back to, we are helping the poor. What we're trying to do is equalize the playing field, remind people that these are human beings that have been robbed of, and it's kind of reinforcing the white savior mentality, and that's not where we want to go after this movement. That's not the direction that we want to find ourselves in. We can't thank a fish for swimming water. Yes, Morgan Freeman says we shouldn't talk about race. We don't talk about race the moment it has been eradicated, because it's still an issue.
You know what? You know what's very difficult around this is, and I know, Joe, you've engaged particularly. I know all of us will have, but I know, Joe, from the stuff I've seen on your profile and stuff online, that you've engaged in lots of conversations like this. Is it's very difficult to help people understand something which any ism is a strong term, right? But when someone gets called a racist, or that they're contributing to racism, people often don't want to admit that.
Well,
and
white people don't like having to deal with the fact that they're white and
exactly.
a person.
And the
Right. But exactly. But the thing is as well that it's very difficult to help people to, and it's not necessarily a point I'm making rather than just an observation, it's just to help people to see their privilege, right? And like you were saying, Joe, is there's it's annoying sometimes that people who are, that you feel like you have to concede something or feel like you're losing out to explain.
You have to walk a lot of people through things,
right?
Which is obviously why Black people are tired of talking to white people about race as a thing, right? Because they go through pretty much like a film script, they hear the same 6 things over and over. But I'm not a racist, but I don't see color. But you know, the crime rate's this, or I knew this family that did this, or my best friend's this. And it's like, you're thinking in such a tiny, microscopic way about a huge thing that, in all honesty, you have no idea about. Like, you do not even, like, you talk about Africa like it's a country. Like, you don't know about the dynasties that existed. You've got no understanding other than your little prescriptive, England's in the middle of the map.
Yeah.
That's it. And the hard thing is, it's very hard to then be okay with hearing someone say stuff for like half an hour back and forth, everything they come back with. But I just think it's like, you know, Khareem has got probably an encyclopedic knowledge of Africa and the diaspora. And, you know, that's really something that would be informative for anybody to hear. But how often does he get to speak about it?
Well, you know, I've been speaking about it for yonks, you know, the fact that, you know, it hasn't reached your ears, you know, that's the thing about it, isn't it? There's the platform, isn't it, that you want to be able to expose these things. I mean, there's many things being mentioned, and Zipporah mentioned things like, I think some random things, like she mentioned Hitler. Now, everybody knows that name. You get taught that in school. You taught that he's a fascist and all that kind of thing, but you never get taught who his teachers are. Now, where did he get the concept of eugenics and fascism from? He got it from Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, who invented the theory of evolution. Yeah. And all these things working together. And then they're rubber stamped by the Royal Society, so they become fact, you see? So they're pseudoscience, and they have no place, you know,
inside,
none at all, you know. And so you don't get to hear these background things. You just see Adolf Hitler, bad guy, boom, 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 boom. Yeah, of course we know that he was. But who are his teachers? You don't get to know about the real truth of the war, you know, the real causes of war and the real reasons. You know, you don't get to get taught that American companies are selling Germany weapons, Firestone, you know, oil. Firestone, the company, we know them for making tires and stuff. They, you know, Remington, arms company, we know them to make shavers, you see, all this kind of things, but they are an arms company selling arms to Germany to kill American soldiers. It's an American company. Where do you learn that? You know, where do you learn that America and Russia were this close in the 19th century, fighting against imperialist Britain and imperialist France? You don't get to know that. You don't get to know that Alexander II, the Tsar, sent his fleets to the Pacific and the Atlantic, New York and San Francisco, to ward off Britain from entering the war on the side of the Confederate States, because Britain wanted the South to win the war because they were feeding their mercantile factories in the UK, the Industrial Revolution. You don't get to hear those things. So we get this filtered history, which is so, as I said, truth is dead in the street and equity cannot enter. That's what it said. And that's exactly what we're living now. And without that, you know, this conversation, sorry, Zipporah, before you come, this conversation we're having now in the street, in the world, the natural progression of that is a discussion which most of those European governments fear, which is about reparations.
Yeah.
That is the next discussion.
But they're okay paying back slaves or ex-slave owners compensation. you know, especially on this issue of reparation. Why was reparation to these African countries and reparation when it needs to be paid a public conversation for the public to decide and discuss, but compensation for slave owners wasn't?
Yeah.
Why was that not a conversation? You know, and like, I think what you're saying, sorry, again, just to interrupt, it's like the Royal African Company. When you're talking about pseudoscience, I think we need to, you know, adopt the mindset of the history that we have learned is a history of scapegoats and cover-ups. Yeah. The moment that we understand that, we realize that, then get a hunger to learn and read. We blame Americans for slavery. You know, that's really but you know that the largest exporters and importers of slaves was the Royal African Company, established by the royal family.
Yeah. Of course. They, as Khareem said, they rubber stamped everything, and that gives it the veneer.
Rubber stamped.
Yeah. No. Okay. But again, this is history we're not taught, right?
Yeah. So just very quickly, the reparations were finished being paid back in 2015. That was at a cost to the British taxpayer at the time when they were drafted in 1833 of 20 million, which would be a lot more now.
So but over 1.5 billion.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So we all of us, all of our, families and all of the ancestors of people who are here from Windrush to chattel slavery also paid that money back to the families.
Even I was paying money.
Right.
Slave owners.
I think you hit a good point there, Joe, as well. You know, the idea that you're going to compensate plantation owners and slave owners for loss of earnings.
Yeah.
And what is key is this, that slavery or slave trade, is abolished in 1807. And it's not till 25 years later that slavery itself is abolished, 1833. Why is there a gap of 25 years between the slave trade being abolished and slavery itself being extinguished? And in that period of time, this is what discussions they're having. What compensation can we pay?
Negotiation.
Raise up money. Yeah, they're getting their self in order to compensate themselves. Because remember, when abolitionists are appealing against slavery, they're appealing to a House of Commons and a House of Lords that is, how can we say, overpopulated with slave owners themselves. So you're appealing for people to like, you know,
interest.
Of course it is. You know, so that's why it takes so long. But it's a nonsense, isn't it? You know, how can I vote against myself? You know.
Yeah, I mean, how are you gonna vote yourself out of an inheritance? That doesn't make sense. And the other thing is also, like, you know, the thing with veterans. You know, for example, I admire the World War II veterans that we speak of, the World War I veterans that we speak of. But when you look at the size of Britain, you realize that there's no way they could have fought those wars by themselves. They are Kenyan. So, you know, and this is what I can speak of because this is what I know about. Kenyans and Indians that fought in those wars.
Yeah.
And it's only, I think in 2016, maybe 2014, that they then received some sort of compensation for that.
That's right.
They went back to work on fields in their countries.
Yeah.
70 and we're talking about protecting war memorials. Their names are not on war memorials, but they actually did a lot of the dirty work.
Yeah. Well, there's less than 500,000 UK soldiers and civilians died in the Second World War. And that's a lot lower number than I would have thought, considering death toll was around 22 million.
Yeah, and the Windrush generation, when you think about that, we're paying reparation to the ex-slave owners who are also still keeping us in some form of systematic slavery.
Yeah.
While
landowners now.
While during that time they said, thanks for helping us rebuild our country. You can go back to where you came from.
And also, here's a lovely statue of us to look at.
Yeah. To remind you, in case you forgot what your colonizers look like.
Remind you of your trauma.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And I think
I want to go back to something that you said about the war, and just to show you the ridiculous nature of these things and the hypocrisy and the underlying untruths. You know, in the First World War, you've got soldiers from the Caribbean, British West Indian Regiment, that were waiting to fight against the Germans. And, you know, the British hierarchy would not let them go to the front line to kill white Germans, even though those white Germans are the enemy, because they couldn't be allowed to have an example of black men or black people killing white people. That would set a bad example to the rest of the world, as it were. So even though your enemy is there, we won't let you kill our enemy. We'll do what we can until we need you, so to speak.
And Khareem, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but Lord Kitchener's in charge of the British Armed Forces.
That's correct, yeah.
Lord Kitchener campaigned in Africa, helped to build and mastermind concentration camps.
In
correct?
South Africa, in the Boer War, yeah.
In the Boer War, okay.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments that people have been putting on as we've had this discussion. Daisy here puts, it's a privilege to learn about racism instead of experiencing it. It's not for a white person to decide what is considered offensive to black people or people of color in general. I don't agree that measuring the emotional response of the oppressed and spectating whether or not it was reasonable is a fruitful conversation.
Okay. Fair point.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Someone's put, are we not slaves now?
Yeah.
This is the discussion, isn't it?
I mean,
the new chains.
That's why we're
and black still can't, and black still can't move up the management rank. So still some form of slavery.
I think one thing that we all hopefully agree on is that out the back of this, and I want to start sort of wrapping up now because I didn't want it to go on for too long, is the importance of education and the importance of a less biased, more historically accurate education, and certainly for people in this country, a better representation of the British Empire in history as not just an empire that we had, but an empire that we were, that we controlled, that was a thing that we created across the world, rather than just Britain and her colonies somewhere else.
On this thing about teaching history in schools, and I think I'm a realist, and that's why I teach. We don't call it Black history; we call it Africology. So we turn it into Africology. As you can see, the things behind me, you can see. I don't know if you can see them very well, but Africology is what we teach, which is the African phenomenon, everything about everything. And we don't really call it Black history because it's world history for us, for me, because every part of our history touches everybody else, and it's impossible to compartmentalize the experience of Africans to just call it Black history. You with me? This thing about teaching Black history in schools, it would be great if it happened, but what would it be? What would it look like? Would it be Martin Luther King? Would it be Rosa Parks? Would it be those things which they find, unoffensive or inoffensive? Would they teach Septimius Severus, the Roman emperor who lived in York, in 193 AD, the year of the 5 emperors, in which 3 of the Roman emperors in that year were black: Pescennius Niger, Claudius Albinus, and of course Septimius Severus. Where do you hear those things? The movie Gladiator showed created a fictional character, Maximus. Well, that is set in the time of Marcus Antonius and Commodus's son. Who are the generals on that German front? It's Septimius Severus and Claudius Albinus. Claudius Albinus is governor of Britain. You can tell from his name alone, Claudius Albinus. This is a North African man who was an albino, literally.
Yeah.
Pescennius Niger ruled in Syria, in Palestine. Yeah. So when Commodus dies, and you have this year of the 5 emperors, the 3 major protagonists for the title of emperor are all from North Africa, all black men. In part of Roman history. You never learn that in school. This, to me, is more fascinating than Maximus, some fictional Russell Crowe character as a gladiator.
And there's an opportunity to teach.
Of course, absolutely.
Because even if it's an outcry and people say there were never any black emperors, immediately you go, well, actually, there were just 3 in 1 year. Mate.
3 in 1 year, thank you.
It seems like we've got to get away from this feeling of insult at all human history stemming from Africa, right? The origin of human history, the origin, of humanity itself.
That's hard for people to hear that have been taught the complete opposite. That's
right.
Good.
But what I would say to my fellow, white humans would be, you really have to learn how to curb your privilege. Your privilege, then we can start talking about real progressive change, because the fact that people are offended by discussing their previous, current, and possible future offense is a privilege. to be the offender and to refuse to hear your offense, again, you have to be in a place of privilege. And the one thing I can say is it's not just in history that we need education. You know, in classes like law, when you're teaching law to I think you start learning law in college, high school, when you're learning sociology, all of that stuff. I think all of the current issues need to be infused in that, so we can stop making the same terrible decisions that are ongoing. And I think it might be easier for us to even not just learn about history from afar, but also learn it as it occurs. Like COVID one day will be part of the syllabus. So why can this not begin to be? We're constantly being. It's amazing. COVID has really illuminated my understanding of what do we need to do. Nobody had to ask. The British government didn't ask the people, how do we do this? They just, in days, shut down the whole country. Any child can tell you how to protect yourself against COVID, but a pandemic that has been there for years, maybe they don't want to address it. And that should be an issue. And I think if we begin to educate, when you're teaching media, teach the future journalist how to use your own discernment, how to tell the truth. Because the most powerful thing that I've really heard you say here, Khareem, is, one of the biggest victims in history has been the truth. So and I think even current truths may speak more so to the current generation than past truths. It was the Amy. You've heard of the Amy Cooper bill?
Yeah.
Have you? But you all know who Amy Cooper is.
Yeah.
That was a learning moment that should go down in from law to sociology to drama, because she should get an Oscar for the
right,
what a case study, right?
A whole case study. So I think that needs. It should be across the board, and these conversations and these platforms shouldn't just be the hype of BLM is a topic of conversation. It should be a reoccurring movement that happens. So as to Morgan Freeman talking about we shouldn't discuss race, when race stops being an issue, then we can stop discussing it. And when we look out globally, the Black man has been on the bottom of every other man's shoe. Like you said, it's world history. The moment we learned that, there isn't anywhere a Black man doesn't face equal racism. China, go to China still, and I think that's the thing that we need to realize. We need to speak about race because systemically, but we also need to value the importance of human connection and human conversation. Because in the same way that hate propaganda can change something, a conversation with real experience can have as much impact. So I think,
I think as well, not that this is an obvious point to raise, but just to point out for anyone listening who's perhaps confused by some of this stuff or still doesn't see how any of this stuff is relevant. Conversation I had the other day on Facebook relating to, okay, I live in a mostly white area. I don't see how this even relates to me, right? And that's the thing that's come up quite a lot in some of my conversations that I've been having with people is, in a very simple way, I think we've got to see that what's happening at the moment in the climate, in this heightened climate, is if we actually get some level of positive result from these things, justice is brought, the education system is improved, that benefits everybody. Okay, it's very difficult, I think, sometimes very difficult to argue against someone whose stance is all lives matter, because it's almost in their mind like they're coming from a good place, right? But the thing is that Black history is world history, and it benefits everybody to learn about it. And I think that's one thing that I think some people don't understand. Equality for people of color, for anybody, but at the moment, Black Lives Matter, equality for that, and a restructuring of the police as they promised to do in Minnesota and starting to other areas, benefits everybody. And this is the thing, is if we need to, it's sad that we have to kind of appeal to people who hold this belief that secretly perhaps that Black lives don't matter, but it's a benefit for society in general because we're human beings. And I think it's important to remember that, to campaign for Black Lives Mattering, or for a marginalized part of society to be recognized equally, is to benefit everybody. It's to benefit the racist, the non-racist, everybody. And it's hard to get that message across, I think.
Can I say one thing very quickly? Please. That Zippo was saying, which was the COVID situation has taught us all something very important. When people want things to change quickly, they absolutely can, right? And like she said, the government, planes out the sky, done, like literally overnight. So they can do it, and likewise we can do it, as we've seen in the last few weeks, just mobilizing, focusing intensity behind Black Lives Matter. We've already started to create some change. Now, it's not the finished thing yet, but what I'm just going to say very quickly is change is possible, and it can happen very quickly with focus and with hope.
And desire.
Yeah, brilliant. Khareem, where can we find your work? Have you got what's your website? Where can people find some of the work that you've done and things that you've published?
I'll give you the stuff, and you can post it up later on the link. But I'm about to start on July the 8th. We'll start a new series of Africology on Zoom, where we'll be looking at sort of African phenomena from everything from my early migrations, and because I think people don't understand that when we see some of these conflicts happening let's take Nigeria, for instance. Nigeria is not a real country. It's a British construct. And within Nigeria, there are different nations. So I think people don't understand that sometimes you see these internal conflicts happening is because people have been lumped together and someone has created a nation out of them and said, hey, well, now you're this country. Yeah, now you all got to get on with it. When traditionally they are individual nations and would have been, sovereign in their own right. So I think these are things that we learn from not just in Africa, but all over. The thing with empires and colonialism, that kind of thing, is that they create these false constructs that we see. And when we look at a map today, everyone believes that this is what they always were called. There always was a Yugoslavia, where we see that no, there wasn't. Now it's 7 different countries. You know what I mean? And these are things, the consequences of war. And of course, I'll give you details, and people can make a connection. That'd be really great. But to go back to your person, Michael, who are living in a cocoon and they don't really see, the Facebook conversation you had with the person there, is that the absence of justice anywhere is the absence of justice everywhere, isn't it? So it's going to connect. It's going to trickle down. It doesn't matter. You can't live in a cocoon.
Exactly. I just want to say thank you to everybody for taking part and for joining in this conversation. Thank you for those online who've watched as well. We're going to end it there. And hopefully we can continue this conversation in a really positive way, to educate each other, to continue to fight for the stuff that matters, and realize, like you were saying, Joe, that real change can happen, and it can happen quickly. We don't have to wait for, COVID, as you're so right, Joe, has opened up this realization within people that when government cares about something, they will shut that thing down so quick. And so it's we've got to start rallying together for this stuff. And again, stop focusing on differences, stop nitpicking on secondary issues, okay? And start to agree on the primary issues that can unite us together, not further divide us. So I really hope and I really pray that that's the kind of stuff that we start to do. And I think we will get there. There's always going to be division. There's always going to be people who disagree. But education is key. And I think tolerance and love is key. I think love, like you were saying, Steph, earlier, I believe also that hate is very thing that's very quick for people to run to, but love is such a stronger emotion. And I think that's got to be the overriding thing here. A love for people, a love for our brothers and sisters, whatever they look like, wherever they're from. At the moment, it's a time to support these Black lives through these protests, and realize, for those of us who don't engage often with these issues or don't involve with this community, that it's a time for us to support human rights and betterment for the world in general, right? Yeah. So I just want to thank everybody for joining this. Hope that you I'll save this video so people can watch along later. Khareem, I'll post your websites and your links and things like that on the chat and,
Yeah,
on
definitely.
Facebook as well. And wish you all a good night.
Yeah, thanks guys.
Night.
Steph, Zipporah.
All right, thank you everybody.
Bye-bye.
Nice one, bro.
Bye bye.